I will say that Anthony is probably one of the most significant people in my spiritual journey, because Anthony's been, I don't know, maybe a forerunner spiritually to challenge and to spur and to spark some things. You know, how many of you know you need someone like that in your life? And Anthony, it's been a long time since he's been here in Waco, because he lives in York, England, and he comes from the motherland. You know, we all came from somewhere over there. So, and I love Anthony, appreciate he and his wife Chris. And Anthony's now retired. He's been a senior pastor of a church for 4 decades, Anthony. He'll probably tell you, I don't want to take any of his, but I'm so grateful for him, and I want to challenge you today. We were talking about this on the way over. You hear me every week, you hear John, but most of you have never heard Anthony. So posture your heart and your ears to hear what God would have for you today through Anthony. So I want to give him all the time. I don't want to take any time from Anthony. So enjoy this. Get Anthony and welcome. Come on here, my friend. I've got so much I can say about him. I'm grateful for him. So you enjoy. That's it. All right, bro.
How's that? We got sound? Yeah.
That sound. All right.
Good morning. It's, as John says, it's been a long time since I was last here, 4 years, due to COVID, and then coming back and had to have a little surgery, and so we've not been able to hook up and connect. And in the meantime, after over 40 years in leadership and 31 years as senior leader of the church back home, I felt it was time to hand over the reins. And so I've been taking the time just to be me. And so actually this is the first time I will have preached for 2 years. So I haven't set foot in the pulpit for 2 years, so that could be good or bad. We don't know which way that's going to go. But I'm so glad to be here and so good to be with you. What do you do when you find yourself at the intersection of faith and belief? Because the two are not the same thing. What happens when the old thoughts and the old ways are not doing it for you? One of the most dishonest places you could ever be in the world is in a church congregation. Because I guarantee you, even looking at you today, that there are many of you who have got thoughts and concerns about what it is you thought you believed that somehow hasn't become what you expected it to be. And I want to encourage you that it's okay to doubt God. He's not going to worry too much about that. He's very secure, and he's very capable to still work with us, for us, through us, around us, whether we believe or not. And he's quite happy for us to walk a journey. And he would rather have genuine faith than forced belief. So what do you do when you reach that place? See, for me, the deciding factor should be hunger for truth over the defense of beliefs. Now again, what you don't get a lot in the church, and I've been around a long time, been right at the forefront of it, been in all kinds and all levels and all sizes, what you really don't have is hunger for truth. What you have is hunger for belief. And you know that it's hunger for belief and not hunger for truth, because if you dare to say something that contradicts the belief, you find the belief is defended, and what might be the truth, I'm not saying it is, but what might be the truth is immediately rejected, because our security is in the set of beliefs, not the dynamic of faith. See, we have a problem. And that problem is what most of us really trust is our beliefs. Now we label that God, but actually I could do many things here today that would show actually what it is that you trust is your beliefs. See, if we're honest, we don't really want to trust God. Because God is dangerous. Our beliefs can define God, or we think we can define God through our beliefs, but we can't. And so the truth is we keep the Creator captive to what we can comprehend. So if we can reduce God to a set of beliefs, we keep him captive to what we can comprehend, and then we mitigate the danger of God maybe not being who and what we thought he was. See, the problem with our spiritual journey is that somewhere along the path to find spiritual wholeness, we became drug-level dependent on written words and prescribed formulas as the measure of all things, rather than what John describes of in John chapter 1 as Word made flesh, Word alive, Word present, Word now. Now that does not diminish or undermine the validity of inspiration coming through the written Word, but it brings us from the written Word to the true source, which is the living present Word. I've said many times to congregations, if everything God ever said and all that God ever was, is, and will be can be contained in a book this thick or this thick, depending on the size of the paper, then we're in trouble. We have to again come to an understanding of a transcendent deity, a transcendent God, who the Bible says the heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain him. But somehow we think we can contain him within our doctrines and our structures and our denominations and our beliefs and our constitutions and our statements of faith. And so we lock God within something that we think we can comprehend in those prescribed formulas and written words that we make the measure of all things rather than the living word. See, in my own ice-breaking journey and endeavours, which turned into my quest, which birthed our church, which became Q Church, not because of QAnon, but because Q stands for Quest. And I needed to change it. We were the Rock Church, but we changed it because we're always on a journey. And when you're on a journey, if things are not changing, you're not listening to what's going on in the journey. And you're supposed to change as the journey moves and move with the journey, not make the journey stay where you are. Do you remember when Jesus was on the road to Emmaus with those guys, and it says they wanted him to stay with them, but he made as though he would have gone further. But in the kindness and generosity that is our God, he stayed with them in their house. But he would have gone further, but they never experienced the further because they wanted him to stay with them in their house. They wanted to constrain him. So we have to move and change, not with the times, but according to the reality of the revelation that happens within us, so we have an integrity to that revelation. I love that story. I'm going to mention it anyway, but it's interesting that then, if you remember the story, it says Jesus broke bread and their eyes were opened and they realized suddenly who it was, and then it says, and he disappeared from their sight. You see, that's so important for us in the days of technology and cell phones. When Jesus revealed himself, he didn't want them to take a snapshot, a photo, a video of him in that moment, then, because forevermore they would relate Jesus to that moment's experience, and he would be stuck, and they would keep him stuck in that moment of revelation. So I have a message, I'm not here to preach it, but I call it the disappearing Jesus. Because I found every time you get a real revelation, a new encounter, somehow Jesus disappears, but we stay. We don't look for the next one, we stay. And so in my journey, when we birthed Q Church, it was coming out of a quest for truth over tribe. Now, if there's ever a nation on the face of this planet, and I've spent 7.5 years of my life here, backwards and forwards and residing here for a time, if there's ever a nation that needs the revelation of truth over tribe, this is it. This is it. Truth over tribe. You guys, with all due respect from the motherland, as the rebels and terrorists, you need to reinstigate the desire for truth over tribe, but you've made tribe more important than truth. Politically, spiritually, and personally. It's time to get back to truth over tribe. Now that may cost you, because there's this little thing called humility, and humility is an interesting thing. And how many of you remember Happy Days and the Fonz? Yeah. Fonz couldn't say sorry. I was wrong. He couldn't get out the words, I was wrong. We are more in the nature and image of Fonzie than we are of Jesus, because we find it very difficult to spit out, I was wrong. But it's okay to be that, because we're moving on. We move on. Truth over tribe. So the dawning reality for me was that in almost all circumstances, our need for certainty overshadows our quest for truth. And it drove me not only to question my truth, but also in the light of that, my perception and beliefs about God. And I'm absolutely delighted that that's the journey that I have taken. I grew up in an environment that was bloated with words, heavy on preaching, and ultra-reliant on Bible, which contains a lot of words, incidentally. And that's sometimes why I was so comfortable with it. But you see, I love this that a friend of mine wrote. Too many words are a sure way to misidentify God. The many words are leaned upon to define for us and to us who God is. The moment we say, this is who God is, we are in danger of believing we have defined the divine essence, who is being itself, and in doing so confined that presence within the pathetic and pitiful bounds of our own human mind, attitudes, and behavioral patterns. And we press towards a rational assent to the truth in the form of certain mental beliefs, rather than pursuing a calm and hopeful trust in God, who is always trying to find his way through the imposition of the narrative of our story onto his story to make his presence felt in our story. We somehow came to presume that by a set of confirmed beliefs, we can corral the divine essence into the finite realms of our human understanding and thereby exert control over a kingdom that he said was his. And gradually the God who is inherent in all things, we separated from most things to be present in only our truth, our tribe, our story, and in doing so, we did not capture who God is, we corrupted who God is. I think somehow we steered the mystery, because what you can't explain, you can't control. And so we don't like mystery. But the root and core of all Paul's teaching to that emerging church coming from institutionalization was the mystery which is Christ. The mystery which is Christ in you. The great mystery that is revealed. But you see, you can't explain it when it's a mystery. so you can't control it. And we don't like that. Without mystery, religion always worships itself and its conclusions, never God. But remember this, mystery is not something you cannot understand. Mystery is something you are endlessly understanding. You can never say, okay, I got it. But always and forever, mystery gets you. You are never apart from it. The mystery gets you. Just learn to live in the beauty of the mystery. Stop being a control freak. And let your journey emerge as God wanted it to emerge, as one of living word. So the best advice that I can give you on the journey of faith is simply this. Begin with the beginning in mind. If you'll do this, you'll live constantly in the blessing of faith rather than the bondage of belief. And I just want to focus on that for 1 second, because the whole emphasis of progressive teaching that got into the business world and has actually seeped its way into the church world, you must begin with an end in mind. What's your 5-year plan? What's your 7-year plan? What about 50 years? Now, that's all good if that floats your boat. But that's not a biblical concept. It's not a God idea. The God idea is begin with the beginning in mind. So you never get ahead of the now. How many of you know God is called I am? And Jesus kept drawing attention to it. Well, if he is I am, and now is the accepted time, and this is the day of salvation, the only moment you can live in is the beginning. But faith draws us to begin with the beginning in mind. Now, I want to take pressure off you. You don't have to have anything more in your mind than a beginning. You don't have to know where it ends or what you're supposed to do to make it end. All you have to know is that you're beginning. And if you bring that into every day, then the power of faith will release something fresh in you. Now, one of my favorite movies of all time is the movie Braveheart. I can't believe it's way back in 1985 that was released. Makes you feel a little old. But I know many others of the same mindset loved that movie for very similar reasons. And to me, it became a source of emotional attachment and great inspiration from the very first day that I saw it. I think it's because it drew me to the type of character that I hoped I was and wanted to become. And that's not a man wearing skirts and running around in makeup, okay? Not every day, anyway. It was the whole idea of a brave warrior willing to fight against tyranny that I saw being imposed upon my fellow countrymen in the form of the religious spirit, the tyranny of the religious spirit. And in the story of Abraham, the patriarch Abraham is a kind of a Braveheart story. It's a story of its day that is a Braveheart story where God tells Abraham, Genesis chapter 12 verse 1, to leave his country and his people and his father's house and go to an unspecified place that he will be shown. Now, our minds, unfortunately, because we're into possessions and territory and geography and occupation, tend to think that the focus of that journey was to get into the land of Canaan, but it never was really. The land of Canaan figured in the journey, but it was never supposed to stop at journey, which is why, at Canaan, which is why the book of Hebrews talks so much, and Paul uses it as well to talk about us being the seed of Abraham and Christ being the seed of Abraham, because it was way beyond anything geographically located. And it was more to do with I like to put it this way. If you think destinationally, then Canaan was the destination, and once you're there is nothing. But if you think rather than destination, you think more of journey, then you have to relabel it. So I think we made a mistake when we called it the promised land. It should have been called the land of promise. And there's a great difference between the two, because the promised land is a location and a destination that you go to, but the land of promise is somewhere where you occupy, and all the time the blessing and benefits and wonder of it continue to exist wherever you are, in whatever place, at whatever time in history. And the emphasis to Abraham was, you go and I'll show. Now our mentality is, God, you show and I'll go. But the pilgrim mentality is, you go and I'll show. Begin with the beginning in mind. Now, what was interesting when, obviously I've had 2 years of stuff stirring around and moving, and in the night, this just kept waking me up thinking about this story. It was interesting that then I had a look and realized that I linked some of what I said last time I was here within this story. So I'm kind of picking up the journey where we left off. So this is the model for faith. You go and I'll show. I think it's the model for you guys in what you are pursuing and where you're feeling to be led. I think the word for you is, you go and I'll show. Begin with the beginning in mind. So, leave your country, your people, your father's house. I don't think that that's written for us because there's no value to be found in the various things that have contributed to the development of who we are. But I think it's a challenge to how they develop and become a permanent position in all of our lives. We become stuck. We are not good at moving on. Once we find a place of comfort, once we find a place of certainty, once we find a place of familiarity, we are not good at moving on. And so we tend to get stuck and protective of that situation, often driven by the fear of what might be, rather than the potential of what could be. An unhealthy but understandable relationship with the concept of death in our lives. What I mean by that is this, that even in the context of change in church, even in the context of re-examining our understanding of God, of our presentation of doctrine, of what we believe is the revelation that we are to get a hold of, we become afraid of it because we have an unhealthy relationship with death. We fear it's going to die. The church will die. I'll die. I'll be lost. I'll no longer be saved. I won't be connected to God. But you see, at the core of everything that we say we teach is a principle called resurrection. And there's one thing essential for resurrection to happen, isn't there? The one essential ingredient for resurrection is death. And so in our lives there should be a constant process of resurrection life flowing out from us. But for resurrection to happen, there has to be death. Something has to die. So in our own journey of faith and our relationship with the divine, there must be constant dying and resurrection. Dying and resurrection. And so this whole business of God saying you've got to leave country, people, father's house, very important. The other thing we also fear is what I call the domino effect. How many of you, as a kid, or it might be as a grown-up, lined up dominoes? Made the shapes, and some of you have seen the great stuff. I mean, YouTube has some fantastic ones of lining up the dominoes. And of course, what happens is when you touch the first domino, what happens? they all begin to fall. Now, I don't know if you had the experience I did as a kid. You know, you spend ages because you're trying to build something, and then some bozo comes and happens to kick the first domino before you're finished, and then everything that you spent all that time putting in line suddenly falls. But you see, there's an issue that we have put dominoes of belief, dominoes of doctrine, dominoes of statements, dominoes of constitution, dominoes of the beliefs. And we actually do have this sense that we don't want some crazy person to come in and touch one of those dominoes because we don't know where that's going to end. It might just mean that all the dominoes that we've spent a lifetime lining up suddenly all fall because one was pushed. I've said to some people, Jesus is the domino pusher. He loves to look for the dominoes, and he came into that Jewish environment with a Pharisaical mindset, who'd now misrepresented his own father and locked him within the boundaries of institutionalized religion and ceremony, who were resistant to the manifest presence of Jesus, the revelation of God himself, resistant to him, not wanting him involved, but he came to push the domino because he knew if he could push the one domino, all the dominoes would begin to fall. We fear that because of all the effort we've put in to lining up our dominoes. Stop working so hard on your belief systems because it all needs to come down. So there were 3 levels of leaving required and inspired towards Abraham. Each one of those leavings was in an area of influence. And it was made clear that leaving them behind was necessary in order to find the freedom that would lead to the wonderful who knows where of not knowing. Now, when you catch what I'm talking to you about this morning, it will turn your focus away from some specified destination, and it will turn your focus back into the wonderful revelation of a journey that actually is not as clear as you thought that it was, but it's always wonderful where it's going. One of my favorite verses in all of the Bible is Hebrews 11 verse 8. And that verse says that Abraham, when called by God to go to a land that he would afterwards receive as an inheritance, get this, I absolutely love this, got up and went, not knowing where he was going. Go and I'll show. It's a constant process of living in he got up and went not knowing where he was going. That's the wonder of it. That's the glory of it. That's the freedom of it. That's the blessing of it. So, these 3 areas of influence that he had to leave behind. That God was pressuring you, Abraham, you've got to leave, you've got to leave, you've got to leave. We don't want to hear that. You've got to leave, you've got to leave. They were representative of everything that develops a hold on us, that drives us to the management of our lives, rather than movement in our lives. And we become managers of our lives, not embrace movement in our lives, again, because you can control if you can manage, but if it's moving, you can't control it. You have to learn just to go with it, and that's when trusting God really counts, not trusting beliefs, but trusting God. So these influences that had brought him to where he was were now holding him back from who he needed to become and where he needed to be. Country. Leave your country. Now, if you think about it, country, people, father's house, they are different levels of experience, different levels of influence, going from the greatest to the most intimate. Country down to house. Country to house. I like to explain it a little bit like this. The country is the widest level of groupthink that you just took on board by being in it. So we all have a country mindset. I don't mean like your country, your mindset. I mean country as in the country. We all have a country mindset. We come into the kingdom of God. We come into church. We get involved with church and we develop a country mindset. The group think that we just took on board by being in it. We call it the common narrative of evangelicalism and Christianity. And that country, that groupthink, that narrative tends to dictate to us what is perceived as normality. And so for us, never mind Father's house, if you just even challenge the groupthink of the denomination, if you just challenge the groupthink of the group, evangelical or charismatic or Pentecostal, if you just challenge that groupthink, if you just challenge the common narrative, you get this big kickback. Why? Because actually we don't want to leave country. Never mind people and Father's house, we don't want to leave country. But he said, leave your country, leave your people. My definition of people is how your tribe thinks and taught you to think. So we've tended to jump. We have the common narrative, the group think of country, that common narrative, that thing we took on board just by being in it. And then we have another level of that, which is how the tribe thinks. It becomes tribal. And that's developed a developed and defended emphasis. So within the whole group think, the country, the common narrative, we all know that whichever church you become involved with or whichever stream, you begin to develop a tribal mindset. And it's a developed and defended emphasis. But that's what it is, it's an emphasis. And the problem is that morphs into tribe over truth. So we go into it with a good heart. We thought, this is just great. We just love this. And then before you know what's happening, you are defending the tribe over truth. Now the tribe can't move on. So you've got to leave country. You've got to leave people. And you've got to leave Father's house. Father's house is the intimate relationships with people and things that have shaped our identity. It's the influences on the people that we most respected. The ones who made the greatest difference. And yet, God is saying to Abraham, if you're going to go to where you need to go, you're going to even have to question your loyalty and connection to Father's house. To the intimate relationship, to the people that have shaped your identity. Because a father is someone from whom you draw identity and security. And he said, you've got to pull away. What is, at this moment, providing your identity and security is holding you back from being able to grasp what it is that you can walk into. And of course, this whole thing of familiarity becomes locked inside of us. We love a bit of familiarity, don't we? Like to know what we can expect. I've often said it this way, familiarity is a faithful friend. It's kind of warming and it's nice, just it's familiar. You know, what John's saying is familiar, what Anne's saying is familiar, what you're doing is familiar. Familiar is a faithful friend, but it's a bad mentor. It's a bad mentor. It's a bad teacher. Because it will hold you within its comforting arms of familiarity. But for Abraham to go where he needed to go, for me to go where I need to go, for you to go where you need to go, for this house to go where it needs to go, you have to leave country, people, Father's house, and go to the who knows where. So please don't ask John, where's all this going? Because he'll give you the answer, who knows where. And it's the right answer. So with this Country People Father's House, as they decrease in size, they increase in difficulty. Because each one becomes more intimate, then becomes more difficult to leave. And that's the journey of faith that takes you from what has now become your institutionalized religious thinking to where God wants you to be. So it gets more difficult. Exactly because they represent everything that we have leaned into for certainty, security, and identity. And they're also the things that have shaped our concept of God. But you have to leave all three to fully gain the benefit of what lies ahead. It will leave you like Abraham with the not knowing where he was going mentality. And I actually love it. It's great. Living in the moment, being rather than doing, and just knowing that there is adventure and excitement, and I'm curious, and Abraham was curious, and you need to be curious. So all this was to lead him to a state of being, not a place of settlement. It was all about his state of being. So stop thinking geographically and territorially, measuring everything by what you can get and what you can have, and start thinking spatially and cosmically. And that's not New Age. Well, it might be New Age. And if it is New Age, it's good. Because we're supposed to think spatially and cosmically about who you are and who you are being. Now, I'm bright enough to recognize that our great difficulty in fulfilling the call to go is the reality that we develop a deep-seated emotional connection with these things that we see as our roots. And we do. We see it as our belonging. Our primary response is to resist and defend because we feel threatened. For Abraham to go, it would require more than just a tinkering with developed beliefs. It would require a radical move into faith, a paradigm shift with an inner conviction that all will be well. You ain't moved into the realm of faith until your inner conviction becomes all will be well. That's the evidence of the presence of the move from belief into faith and inner conviction that all will be well. And it's going to be fine. So, I know time's going a little bit, but that's all right. We'll get through a few more little bits. So I tried to lead my people at Q Church to have the same mindset, a Braveheart mindset, an Abrahamic view of the world, to understand how past and present influences can stall progress and how settlers can't be pioneers. How tent over temple means movement over management. Do you understand what I'm saying in that? The trouble started for Israel when they went from tent to temple. Because now you've got walls and constriction and a building. And yeah, God allowed it and God worked with them, but it didn't really work, which is why the Gospels and the epistles keep trying to pull us back to being tents, tabernacles of the Holy Spirit. Because tents can up and move wherever they need to go. And we need to be tent dwellers, not tabernacle, not temple dwellers. But it's not faith, actually, that you need to engage with the Abraham journey. It's courage. Faith is what you need for the journey, but courage is what you need to start the journey. And I pray today that you will have an upsurge of courage to say, okay, let's do this, let's go for this. Let's leave Country People Father's house and go to the who knows where. Belief is not a journey, belief is a destination. Belief is all about arriving. And remember this, that which you define, you confine. That which you define, you confine. Faith is not a destination, faith is a journey towards. It's all about going. The difference between belief and faith, I believe, is this. Belief is static and faith is dynamic. So it's sometimes not faith for the journey that we lack, but it's the courage to leave in the first place. You guys have had some courage. Others couldn't quite muster the same courage that many of you have mustered, and I honour you for it. But it's the beginning of allowing that process of faith to work for us and find that who knows where that God has promised us. So just like the Braveheart movie, the Bible is a book about freedom, championed by Paul in the New Testament, because he said it is for freedom that Christ set us free, which, if you think about it, is a very weird verse. Because surely all you need to see is Christ set us free. So why does Paul say it is for freedom that Christ set us free? Doesn't it go without saying? No, it doesn't go without saying. His point is that you can have the resident reality of the freedom that Christ brings, but you have to live into a freedom. Christ has set us free, but he set us free for freedom. But most of us have been set free, but we actually don't know how to live in freedom, even though we've been set free. That's the lesson. That's your homework. So in that Braveheart movie, I've always loved the part where he's brought them to a place of freedom, and then he says, but what will you do with that freedom? So let me begin to wind this through to a close. There are many things in our Western Christian tradition that obstruct our ability to embrace and live in that freedom. Particularly in our evangelical tradition, there is a lot of constriction, a lot of thou shalt nots, even though we said we're free from the law, but thou still shalt not. We've not understood how to live at the tree of life as opposed to the struggle of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, living by right and wrong rather than by living a revelation of life that Paul said, listen, he said in 1 Corinthians 6 and 1 Corinthians 10 and 1, he's talking about sexuality, and he says everything is permissible. That blows congregations away when you say, Paul says, regarding to your sexuality, everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything's permissible, but don't be mastered by anything. And he talks about what I would say now is the culture. So he uses it, he says about meat offered to idols, or we don't have any of that. He's saying, really for us, that would interpret, when you interact with the culture, everything is permissible. But not everything's beneficial. Everything's permissible, but some things will master you. What is Paul saying? He's saying you have to learn to live by a different criteria when you're in this freedom that comes from a heart connected to the life that's within you and the word that's coming out of you, that you don't need a bunch of rules and regulations for you to be able to express the wonder of what it is that you have committed yourself to. See, the problem is, and I need to say this because it's very important, where there is an obsession with sin, and the whole root of what we have come through, even though we nicen it up, a bit like when the women were bringing spices to anoint the body of Jesus, It might be dead, but if we make it smell good, nobody will notice. We've spiced up what it is that we have, but in essence, although we talk about the gospel, actually, we have a sin obsession within the church, within the Western church particularly, a sin obsession. So even the whole issue of the influence of Augustine on the idea of original sin, it's a sin obsession. And it's not a biblical view of the process of humanity. It's a religious view of the process of humanity. So we've become obsessed with the whole sin thing. Now the problem is where there is an obsession with sin, you create a heightened conscience. And a heightened conscience leads to guilt. It doesn't lead to freedom. It leads to guilt. It leads to condemnation. It leads to wondering, second guessing, not wonder, wondering. And it leads to regret. And we become haunted by the what ifs. and the tyranny of the shoulds. I should have. If they had, we should have, we must. And we become haunted by that. That's all coming from a root of an obsession with sin. When your obsession should be in agreement with the Holy Spirit, who says, John 16 verse 8, you'll find this, he convicts the world of righteousness. I was convinced the Holy Spirit was here to convict the world of unrighteousness and let us all know how unrighteous we were. But when you read John's writing correctly, he says the Spirit came to convict the world of righteousness. God's saying, I have judged this thing, and you all, every one of you in here, are judged righteous. Now go live in the freedom of that judgment, because the Holy Spirit judges you righteous. So God is not getting us to a sin obsession, he's getting us to a righteousness obsession, the understanding of who we really are. Convicts the world of righteousness. Now, the issue is so where there's an obsession with sin, it creates a heightened conscience, but where there is a conviction of righteousness, it creates a heightened consciousness. And the difference is we move from conscience to consciousness, which are two very different things. Conscience drives to intense doing. Because you feel guilty all the time. I haven't done enough. If only I'd done this for my kids, I didn't raise my kids right. Look what's happening there. Oh, and if I hadn't just made that decision today, and I failed, I had a little too much to drink, I went where I shouldn't have gone, blah, blah, blah. We're all, it's all this thing all the time, this guilt and condemnation going on inside of us. Conscience then drives you to intense doing. I've got to fix this. Usually through an underlying fear and condemnation. Whereas consciousness relaxes into contented being. That consciousness of my acceptance and righteousness and accepting that I am accepted, it relaxes me into a contented being through a peaceful acceptance of that reality. Christ consciousness is not the ability to recite a set of words about Jesus or reference a particular felt experience at some point in life, but the immovable, constant and present awareness of a oneness at work in all things, a belonging that goes way beyond belief, a knowing that cannot be produced by purely academic or religious pursuit. And within that consciousness, even doubt is not destructive. And even failing beliefs cannot derail the purpose and potential that is the miracle called you. So I know I've run over a little bit, but let me finish up by saying just these two things. How many of you remember Join the Dots as a kid? Do you remember the Join the Dot pictures, the books that we had? Listen, think about life simply. Life is simply a lived out expression of that. You join in the dots. But what you need to do is get rid of the condemnation of the pass fail effect, of the numbers, because that's an imposed misrepresentation. Because remember, you have to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. There's no liberty, it's defined. And we perceive God and the will of God and what we're supposed to do like this. I was supposed to go from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6. And we look at it like that. But you see, if you can replace those numbers with the word next. And suddenly all the condemnation and judgment and pressure goes, because what am I going to do? I'm going to do what's next. Which number is that? Oh, I don't have any numbers. Well, how do you know it's the right next? Because it's next. And it's never wrong because it's always next. I go from next to next to next. And you see, your life is a series of nexts. And if you can take the numbers and the condemnation of it and just realize that all of it, in the doubts and the problems and the issues, the challenges, the beliefs, the unbeliefs, we're just moving to next, and you can go to next and keep going because you've left country, people, father's house, and you're going to the who knows where, you'll find a picture begins to emerge in the middle of it all. And it's a picture that's shaped not only by the hand of God, but it's shaped by the hand of you. See, when next replaces the number, it makes the process fluid, accessible, and full of grace. And what we have come into is supposed to be fluid and accessible and full of grace. So note and remember this. The dots of doubt are just as important as the dots of belief. The dots of success are no greater than the dots of failure. They're just dots in the process, in the formation of the complete picture. So I'm going to finish there just by reading you a statement that I made to the church when I decided 2 years ago that I was going to retire. And hopefully this will tie everything together and just give you a little platform to work from. So this is what I said to them. Looking back on my dance with belief and doubt, I have regrets. Just a few. I regret all the energy that I invested into perfecting beliefs, promoting them, defending them, and imposing them on others. I regret how I used my beliefs as a yardstick to measure, judge, accept and reject others and myself. I regret how much deference I showed to belief police and doctrinal gatekeepers who were more like prison guards than good shepherds. My regrets fuel this hope that future generations will learn to guide people beyond obsession with beliefs and into faith. Faith that breathes meaning into life. Faith that flows through consciousness. Faith that joins the dots, not through a set of pre-prescribed number steps, but simply through recognizing and living in the now and moving to the number next. In spite of these regrets, I do not regret my journey of faith and doubt, because I do not regret who I have become. Faith and doubt together have made me who I am. I wouldn't want to live without either. And because of that, I continue to join the dots.
All right, guys, stand your feet before we dismiss today.